Well, didn't want to make this into a storytelling marathon, but I wonder if we string several old anecdotes together, whether they will allow us to recognize where we've been and where we're at. At first, there's a little story about a young man who had a young family, but was very jaded, very weighed down by the responsibilities of his life, earning a living to care for his family. His eldest son was particularly difficult, and he didn't know how to handle him, and it all got too much for him. So he decided that he would go to a monastery to see if they could introduce him to some teacher that would allow him to find some semblance of peace. He was just desperate. But when he went to the monastery, he received instructions from the messenger who came out, the monk who came out to him and said, well, you can't be admitted to the monastery unless you spend several days in preparation. And so this he was willing to do. So he was put in a little annex beside the reception hall of the monastery. And there he was left alone. Well, after a few hours, he started to pace up and down with great anxiety and stress, all of that had built up inside of him. And he was saying to me, well, what's it all about? What's it all for? What's the reason for all of this? But after a while, he got somewhat worn out, and all of a sudden, up came within him a great deal of anger. He was angry. He said, I've tried my best. I've tried to please people. I've done everything. I've earned my living and tried to help my family. And this went on for some long time. And after that had played itself out, all of a sudden, he started to weep. He just wept. He wept and wept, floods and floods of tears that seemed to go on for hours and hours and hours, until that too was spent. And then he felt a great deal of hopelessness, powerlessness, uselessness, no purpose. And that went on for some long while. And then, when that passed, he felt into a great pathos, what we would describe as a great depression, a hole of hopelessness. But that too passed, and he sat with what you might say is a semblance of peace, filled with deep sighs. Were they longing? Were they hopelessness? Were they pain? They were just sighs arising out of the depth that had been reached after his emptying. After the 7 days, the abbess herself came to him and congratulated him on being able to weather these 7 difficult days. And she said, we've had great difficulty in finding the proper teachers for you, but we have succeeded. And she took his hand and led him down the path of the monastery to the monastery gate, and opened the gate. And there, outside the gate, was his wife and his 3 children, with open arms, awaiting and welcoming him. And the abbess said, these are the greatest teachers, those who will bring you to that which you seek." And she went inside the monastery gate and closed it behind her. Then there's the story of that samurai swordsman. He was a brave fighter. He'd served his lord well in the endless battles that seemed to have taken place. And then he learned that his lord was a despot, greedy. So he decided that he would seek out a Zen master. And so he did. And when he arrived at the abode of the Zen master said, "Before you enter, you must leave your sword outside." He refused. "My sword is what I live by, and it stays by my side." So the Zen master ushered him in and sat him down opposite the little brazier that heated the room. And the samurai swordsman asked of the Zen master, "Will the war ever end?" And the Zen master very calmly took the pipe that he was smoking and smacked the samurai swordsman hard over his cheek. Immediately, the samurai's hand went to his sword, and he was about to draw it out of its sheath when he looked deeply into the eyes of the Zen master, who was sitting there calmly observing him. And as he did so, the samurai swordsman had the thought, "How dare he? Doesn't he know who I am? Doesn't he know that I can run him through with my sword?" But the Zen master continued to gaze at him peacefully, and the samurai swordsman had another thought. "Well, he is a Zen master." And then, under the steady gaze of the Zen master, he thought, "Well, I did ask him." And then the thought, there must be a reason. And then there's that well-known story about that general who had become a rebel, a marauder, a killer, a rapist, gathering a band of ne'er-do-wells around him, and they pillaged the countryside, going from village to village, burning, thieving, raping. But, as is the way in such places, word would often arrive at the village to which they were heading that they were about to come. And so it happened in a certain town, and all the villagers escaped as quickly as they could to the hills nearby. The general and his marauders came into the town and began to set fire, and they went out to seek those they could kill and steal from. But as each of the pillagers came back to their general, they said that the town was deserted. Everyone had escaped, except one, who came to his general and said, "Oh, there's just an old monk sitting up there in the hut, meditating." So the general marched up the street to the little hut, and slamming open the door, he marched in, and taking out his sword, he put it at the throat of the monk sitting in lotus position there, and said, "Don't you know that I can run you through without blinking an eye?" The monk looked up at him quietly and said, "And don't you know that I can be run through without blinking an eye?" And lastly, there's that old story about the fifth Zen patriarch, who was at the time when it was necessary to seek his successor to pass on his staff and his robe. So he approached the head monk of the monastery, and the head monk went to the wall and wrote on the wall, "The body is the Bodhi tree, the mind a mirror bright. We carefully clean it hour by hour to let no dust alight." Some while later, the simple kitchen monk, who had stirred the rice for many years, a peasant, a simple man, came out and, reading the writing on the wall, draw it through in a stroke and wrote, "There is no Bodhi tree, nor stand of mirror bright. If everything is emptiness, where can the dust alight?" Is this not our path? The milestones along our way to become that monk who can be run through without blinking an eye. To recognize in our simple ordinariness the profound awareness of the illusory nature of existence, the inherent emptiness of beingness itself. To where does this lead? What follows on from this is what yet to be experienced. Emptiness here, emptiness there, emptiness everywhere, and yet existence unfolds before our very eyes.